Some call it land grabbing, others say it's a fair business opportunity that helps the world to grow more food. Today we're looking at how multinational companies and some governments are snapping up land in sub-Saharan Africa. Global food prices have risen and the demand for biofuels is on the up, and that's made farmland a golden investment opportunity. Those in favour say it leads to bigger harvests and new jobs, but the critics say local farmers and communities are being shortchanged. In a moment, we'll discuss the issues here in the studio, but first, here's a snapshot from Benin in West Africa. As multinational companies are moving in, campaigners there are warning about the consequences.
Joseph has always worked on the land, specifically on this land in Benin, which he inherited from his father. It's how he feeds his family. Joseph's 10 hectares are in demand. Not a day goes by without someone offering to buy them.
People come here, they keep on coming. They're always showing up, especially because my land is next to a spring which never runs dry. I don't want to sell my land because I live here. And I know what's going on all across this area. I know what's become of people who've sold up. A farmer who has sold his land is like a soldier who has sold his weapon.
So who are these buyers? Many are multinational companies represented by local intermediaries, and according to villagers, they promise fabulous returns for those who sell.
There are even people who come and tell us, if you sell your land, we'll set up a business here and employ you and your children. There'll be this, there'll be that, but these are just utopian stories.
Julien believed the stories, or rather, he was forced to believe them. He used to be a farmer. We met him next to what was once his plot of land. He tells us how a man from Benin came and warned him that he was going to be thrown off his farm and that he'd be well advised to sell. Several people continued the pressure until finally Julien gave in and sold the land for around half its real value. When we spoke to him, he hadn't even received all of that payment. So Julien is now a farmer with no land. He's surviving by running a motorbike taxi. He's no longer allowed near his old farm, which is guarded at all times. The new owners grow rice, and further off, out of view, they've planted palms to produce oil for biofuel. It was a political leader from within Benin who oversaw the transaction over Julien's land. He's promoting contracts to lease land for 25, 99 and even 125 years.
I'm looking for multinationals which need land, to help them sign contracts. I'm looking, but I haven't found any yet. If I find them, I accompany them and drive them to the land. We look at everything, what they want to grow, what kind of land they need. I've got different kinds. If it's right, I can offer them an area of 10,000 hectares, 20,000 hectares, or even 100,000 hectares for their needs.
Some, however, find this approach scandalous. Jeanne has worked for years as an activist for an international farming charity, campaigning against what they call the land grab.
For us, this government's giving the green light to foreigners to come and take Benin's land. Actually, it's more than that. The government is showing them the steps to take to destroy the local way of life. There are some who say, we're not selling, we're only leasing the land. But if you lease the land for 99 or 125 years, doesn't it come down to the same thing?
Jeanne isn't only worried about land rights. For her, there are other serious consequences.
The second danger, in my view, is that to give the land to multinationals, to foreigners, favours industrial-scale farming. So that means single crop cultivation, and that destroys local biodiversity. Then the third danger, I think, is the question of food sovereignty. If small farmers no longer have their own land to produce their own crops, then their control over their food supply is weakened. And they have to rely on what the multinationals produce.
Jeanne and her colleagues say they're fighting against a form of neo-colonialism. They're hoping to mobilize public opinion against what many feel is a farmland hold-up before it's too late.
All right, joining us now for more is Jonathan Brooks, who's a senior economist at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, more commonly known under the abbreviation OECD. Thanks very much for speaking to us here at France 24. First of all, what's driving this development? Why has land become such an investment opportunity by the looks of it?
Well, I think what's really driving it is the basic global arithmetic. We have a world population of 6 billion people at the moment that's expected to rise to 9 billion by 2050. So that's a 50% increase in the world population. If you add in rising incomes across the world, that's likely to translate into something like a 70% increase in the demand for food that will have to be met by supply from somewhere. And I think what that translates into is a very positive assessment of the outlook for agricultural markets.
Now, what's the typical profile of a land buyer in these cases? Are we talking about state actors? Or are we talking about private enterprise for the most part?
Well, most of the actual transactions that are being concluded at the moment are in fact by private companies. I think the profile of these private companies is somewhat different to what you and I would think of as being an agricultural investor. We would often have thought of agribusiness companies investing in products for markets, whereas what we're seeing now is institutional investors who are investing in the asset of land and seeking resources to a greater extent than seeking markets. Although it's mostly private agents that are driving it, in many cases there's heavy state involvement at the back of that, and a lot of the push that's coming from governments is because of their own concerns about food security. I mentioned that there's a growing demand for food in the world, but what's going to happen is that many of the countries in which we'll see income growth don't have agricultural potential, and so what they're doing is they're seeking out land to make sure that they can grow enough food for themselves. So there's a strong possibility there's a state involvement behind these private enterprises. I think one of the issues as well is that with governments, in principle, they should be able to get food on the world market. But at the moment, with the recent experience of the increase in food prices in 2007 and 2008, they're not so confident. They don't feel that they can actually trust world markets.
Now, if you look then at the benefits of all of this, are there benefits? The report told us about a lot of the drawbacks, but there must be benefits as well, right?
I think in principle that's right. If you look, for example, at African agriculture has been starved of investment for decades, and in order for the world to feed itself by 2050, there are estimates that there's a need for as much as $80 billion a year of investment. Now that is a huge amount, and if you look at where that money's going to come from, African countries in many cases don't have a great deal of their own domestic resources. They spend less than 10% of their budgets on agriculture. Aid has been declining, although there's some commitment to reverse that trend, but aid is relatively small, and microfinance only has a limited role. So foreign investment in terms of developing African agriculture has to play an essential role. If it can do that, if it's done properly, it can provide jobs, it can help upgrade the infrastructure, it can bring new technologies. There are so many benefits that it can potentially offer, but of course it does need to be done correctly, and if it's not done correctly, we see the kinds of problems that were alluded to here. People getting kicked off their land, food getting produced and then sent for export elsewhere, so it doesn't stay within the local economy, and generally very adverse consequences for the domestic economy. So it very much depends on the way in which it's done.
Is this the future of Africa's villages? About half of Liberia's landmass is now controlled by private investors. They're gaining huge concessions and using them for timber, mining, or plantations. This concession of 220,000 hectares in northwestern Liberia is now controlled by a Malaysian company, Sime Darby. It's planting millions of palm trees to produce palm oil, a highly profitable crop with a fast-rising price. It's a huge project with an investment of more than $3 billion. The company is promising to build dozens of new villages, schools, and clinics for the people on its concession. But the villagers are unhappy. Most of their traditional farmland is gone. Their way of life has been changed forever, and there aren't enough jobs to replace their lost income.
Now, since David entered, we're expecting plenty things to happen. And now we are lack of food, and no hospital, no school. We're not working. And we have to pay the teacher then, but no money. Teacher will not stay down here without money. So they go away.
The Malaysian company is admitting that it made mistakes. When it cleared the land, it didn't leave enough farmland for the villagers.
Yes, I agree there's something not up to the mark, but we are doing something. We are doing, and then we are working together with the community's leaders to resolve this. Not to say that we just, say we are not doing anything, we just don't care. No, we are a very responsible company. We don't come here just to develop and then ignore the people surrounding. Ideally, this is the message. We want the people surrounding to benefit. At the same time, we want to make business here.
The villagers are skeptical. They say they were never properly consulted about this huge plantation on their land. It's a warning about the dangers of the growing wave of land grabs across Africa.
What do you make of the so-called scramble for African land?
Thank you very much. Indeed, as the World Bank report puts it, there are two sides to every coin, and the land acquisition in Africa by not only the investors from within Africa, but foreign companies or foreign governments in Africa has attracted a lot of attention. Now we're seeing interest from three particular sources. First of all, governments in especially Middle East looking at their food security initiatives. Secondly, institutional investors diversifying away from the equities market to more longer term investments such as in land, perhaps as an inflation hedge. And then lastly, we're looking at the previously small scale farmers within Africa also scaling up as a result of the attractiveness of the agriculture sector. Okay. So indeed a very topical issue.
And a very sensitive one, Dennis, but some people would say, why are we all up in arms about the so-called land grab when a lot of the land that's being bought and the deals are done are for land that hasn't been cultivated? Apparently that's our problem in Africa, is we're not utilizing the land that's available to optimum potential.
Correct. And the problem has been exacerbated by the fact that, public infrastructure development is very low in the rural areas, also compounded by the fact that land rights, indigenous land rights or customary land rights have not been enforced. But I think that the debate is more increased because a lot of the deals have been done in a way and manner in which people suggest there's lack of transparency. I think what the uproar is arising from is the fact that people would like to see a lot more openness and a lot more benefits, and even perhaps the methods of engagement with the people interested in acquisition of land in Africa, perhaps a more participatory approach. I think that is the reason. Much as the farming has been done in Africa in a more small-scale way, people are increasingly becoming aware of the value of agriculture, and also a number of government initiatives are geared towards that. I think it's the method of engagement with the host countries that is causing the uproar.
All right, also what's causing a bit of uproar and outrage is that a lot of the multinationals or the private equity investors that are doing the land deals are using the land to farm for their own food security. So in other words, they are exporting the food back to the home country to service the domestic needs there and not really helping to address South Africa's food security issues.
Absolutely, and I think this is where the engagement methodology needs to change. There are a number of areas. Responsible agro-investing requires that there's attention paid towards the social implications, the environmental implications, and also engagement with the local partners. If you look at it, the large-scale commercial farmers or commercial investors into agriculture bring with them technology, they bring accessibility to markets, infrastructure development, but there needs to be a level of engagement with the actual farmland owners, and also there needs to be, they bring in local knowledge. And then government policy is very critical in this. To what extent is government policy directed towards attracting systematically the institutional investors in such a way that there's long-term sustained benefit both to the investors coming in and also to the countries themselves? So in this example, for instance, the need not only for agri production for export purposes, but also to enhance value to the agricultural products within Africa, to be able to meet the food security needs in Africa, and at the same time meet the export targets that are required, and food security for the investing community is also important. So I think this goes back to engagement methodology, which I mentioned about earlier.
Okay, Dennis, we've got a guest host here with us in Johannesburg. His name is Andrew Duvenage. Andrew, Dennis is also talking about a win-win for everybody, all right? And fundamentally stressing this need to commercialize farming. A lot of farming activities in Africa involve small-scale farmers. They're not producing large volumes. We're not exporting a phenomenal amount. We need to start being a little bit more clever about how we approach agriculture.
Yeah, and I think as Dennis quite correctly says, is there's a political issue to it as well, because while Gini coefficients across Africa tend to grow, as you've got the haves and the have-nots, you have people who need access to this land, but certainly don't have access to the finance, to the technology, to the markets to be able to do this on a commercial scale. And many failures that you've seen have been people who've been given this land, but just not the resources and left to flounder. At the same time, the land is valuable enough, or that valuable for food security purposes, that this can't be allowed to happen. So you have to balance the needs of the people on the wrong end of the sort of Gini coefficient and the commercial aspect to it.
Mazze wano emyaka mu kibanja kyange emyaka 34. Natandika okulima ekibanja ekyo nga nyina emyaka 15. Era okusoma kwange tekwali kuwanvu olw'ensonga nti we nali nfunye ekibanja kyali kiraga nti maaso kijja kunnyamba. Naye neewuunya mu mwaka guno abakulu baava gye baava ne bajja baŋŋamba nti ekibanja kyo kikugiddwako. Naye nakyewuunya bwewuunya okulaba nga baŋŋamba nti ekibanja kiguliddwa n'abantu mugenda kuvaako. Nze ne mbagamba nti siyinza kuva ku kibanja kyange kubanga wenkulidde wenzalidde abaana bange. Kakati nannyini ttaka n'aleeta guleeda era nagenda okuva eyo zaffe okutuuka mu Nakani nga guleeda zirimu guleeda 5 zonna zisenda kibanja era zatandikira ku kibanja kyange era ebintu byange baabitwala. Mpitawo buyisi naye ntunulira ntuuka ne ku kibanja kyange nempula nga njagala kukaaba amaziga. era ne bateekawo n'abasirikale nga tebatukkiriza kugenda mu bibanja byaffe. Bugagga bwa kika kyo. Obutonde babwonoonye. Situkyalina nkulaakulana eyo naffe ng'abasisi era batugo. Bo nga bakolawo byawo basimbawo binazi. Tuwulira ennaku nnene nnyo ffe ng'abasisi era njagala ne bwe munaaba mubuuzizza wano mu Kalangala ne mubuuza abasisi abasinga obungi. Namba esinga batono nnyo abaganyiddwa mu kintu binazi. Naye ffe abantu abasinga ffena tubonaabona bubonyibonyi. Kubanga buli waba nti omutaka asimbye kutunda kitundu kye atunda butunzi. Mmwe abaliko tabalumirirwa. Muveeko mugende. Naye munoonya ne gye mulaga temulabayo. Naye nga wano bwe tunaba nga situfunye buyambi abasese tugenda kubeera nga n'ensi yaffe ejja kusaanawo nti abo baali basese. Naye nga omuntu omusese tewali wabula abantu abagwira be bagenda okuba nti Kalangala akulaakulanye ku lwabo abazzi. So si kuffe. Wandibadde weekulaakulanyiza kibanja bakikuggyeeko n'enkulaakulanya gy'otaddemu nayo bagisaanyizzaawo. Kati ffe twebuuza tukole ki? Oba bakulaakulanyiza wamu ebyaffe batukulaakulanye naye nga naffe weetuli naffe nga tuli mu nkulaakulana naye so si kujjawo bujja oli n'agamba nti genda.
Small farmers in Liberia are being bulldozed out of their lands by multinational companies, depriving many communities of their livelihoods. Investors have flooded Liberia in the last couple of years after the brutal regime of Charles Taylor ended. About $19 billion is reported to have been invested by foreign firms in the country's natural resources, including land. However, the US-based Center for International Conflict Resolution, who carried out a study on the impact of foreign land grabs on Liberian communities, thinks investment deals have the potential to sow future seeds of civil conflict. The report also noted that local landowners were not compensated adequately, jobs to locals were a few, and government's failure to make sure investors complied with protecting community interests. With a rush to secure investment for her country, President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf has allowed Liberian farmers to be pushed off their land and offered them to foreign investors on a platter.
President Johnson Sirleaf has reportedly told dispossessed communities, quote, "When your government and the representatives sign any paper with a foreign country, the communities can't change it," unquote. Let me just quote you one example, that in 2009, this is one of the deals, a certain company was awarded 220,000 hectares as part of a 63-year concession agreement. What's wrong with that picture?
I think we have a pool of professionals who could have done the job, who could have looked after the interests of the Liberian people. The question is, were they consulted? Was anyone keen to bring them on board? Or was it a deal that, you know, as has been witnessed in many parts of other African countries, people do these deals more or less where they have personal interests.
So there's no transparency in this, because I can't find any information that tells us who struck the deal on behalf of Liberians.
Well, we now know that the deal was not done. The particular company you mentioned there, Simi Darby, I think, everyone knows that was a tragedy. I mean, even the president herself has apologized and acknowledged that. And I think she's putting a team together to look back into that deal. although she seemed to be resigned that it cannot be reviewed.
And she actually told those communities, it almost sounds a little bit patronizing, that statement that she made, where she said, once the agreement is signed, you can't change it, which is the antithesis of what democracy is supposed to be.
These agreements go on for such a long period of time. You know, 63 years, another one is 99 years. I mean, you don't do this with a country. You know, this, for God's sake, this is a country. This belongs to people.
So you have been writing about the issue of the French and the issue of land grab in Mali. What's the history of this?
Well, of course, France was the colonial power in Mali for a long time, as well as in Libya and Chad. And so what we're seeing right now is almost a reenactment of a colonial war taking place here to stop what is effectively the independence movement of the Tuareg from sweeping in and doing away with decades of oppression.
You've tied this to the issue of land grab, and of course it's not just the Tuaregs now. It's a pretty complicated situation in Mali, including various forces that are supposed to be Al-Qaeda-like or Al-Qaeda connected. And then what land is at stake for France?
The connection between Libya and Mali. France got involved in Libya chiefly because of oil with the United States, and Libya, as a semi-peripheral country, was relying on a huge amount of land, roughly about 350 square miles of rice plantation, in order to have food security to feed their country. So what they did was they built a 20-mile canal going out of the Niger River to irrigate this huge rice plantation.
This is in Mali.
In Mali, exactly.
Yeah, so the point here is the Libyans were developing this rice plantation in Mali, and now the French want it? Is that what's at stake?
Well, the French need to maintain food security for Libya in order to maintain the business relationships that they're building currently, using Libya as a kind of proxy for the periphery. And so Libya needs food security from Mali in order to continue to produce oil effectively and stave off revolution in that country. So, so this is kind of a supply chain of colonialism.
And is there any reason to think if the Tuaregs had more sovereignty, they would threaten those Libyan rice plantations?
Well, for sure, because climate change is just slamming the Sahel right now. They're in a very, very long drought. And so traditionally, most of Mali is subsistence farming. And the important thing to really talk about is that it isn't just the Tuareg, it isn't just Al-Qaeda, it's a mixture of those two, but it's also a kind of revolutionary sentiment sweeping through the country because of the fact that climate change is really changing the way that people are able to farm and produce for themselves. And the Malibia Canal, the canal that the Libyans dug with Chinese contractors, totally circumventing the former colonial masters, the French, has a lot to do with kind of draining off and siphoning out the most important human right of water from the Malian people.
And this is, as you said, to provide food for Libya. So in theory, the people from Mali would prefer to keep the water in Mali because there's so little of it.
Well, yes, the drought is really terrible, and it's not just about Mali. In this case, Mali is kind of a spark plug for the entire African continent. There was actually a meeting there in 2011 that La Via Campesina put together and hosted of land-based movements of farming peoples who are coming together and trying to figure out how to stop so many land grabs from basically dispossessing small farmers and establishing export crops, namely for food security and for luxury items such as biofuels.
All over Africa, not just in Mali.
This is the village of Namawala in central Tanzania. Residents were stunned last summer when authorities ordered most of them to hand over their land. The companies from the Middle East and other regions attempted to acquire about 10,000 hectares of the village land. Zuberi Hamed is the head of the village. He says local government officials came to their village last August and forced them out.
The officials ordered us to leave, even before we'd decided where to go. After all, there is nowhere else all the villagers can live together. We raise our children and lead a life on this land. We cannot earn a living in a different location.
Empty homes and abandoned farmlands have become conspicuous in the village since the authorities banned agriculture.
Families in this home and that one have already left the village.
Villagers had no choice but to suspend the construction of an elementary school. About 200 children were deprived of school education. Hamed held a rally with residents to protest the government move.
If foreign firms obtain our land, we won't be able to get food, feed our families, or allow children to go to school.
What lies behind this problem? In many African nations, residents do not have the right to own land. In Tanzania, land is the property of the government. Residents are only allowed to use land. The authorities say the villagers of Namawala do not even have the right to use the land.
But all of a sudden now, people have shown a very big interest in that particular land. And the villagers, for instance, they have seen it as now as an opportunity to get some money.
Hamed and his villagers filed a complaint with the court over the ownership of the land. However, the authorities are boycotting the court sessions.
Government officials came to us without advance notice and seized our land. Their action is nowhere near legal. We want to protect our land and the future of our land.
Joining us in the studio is Kohei Tsuji, who filed this report. Thanks for coming in. The situation looks very complex. First off, will foreign investment, when they bring their money in, will that resolve such things as poverty and starvation in Africa?
It really depends. In the case of Indian company featured in the report, the land lease doesn't really impose limits on where those farms can sell the crops, and which means that the farm can sell all those crops outside the country if they wanted to, even if the famine occurs there. And at the same time, however, African countries want to get out of poverty by welcoming those investors and boosting agricultural productivity. And they hope that the foreign investment will bring modern agricultural technology and improve local infrastructure.
There seems to be more immediate problems like forcible eviction, and that seems to continue, as we've seen in your report. Will that trigger social unrest, and if so, how can it be prevented?
Right. In March last year, a row over foreign acquisition of farmland in Madagascar toppled the country's government. And the people were infuriated by reports that their government had struck a deal with a South Korean company to lease farmland free of charge for 99 years. And it resulted in the military forcing president to step down. Well, this incident shows how sensitive the issue of foreign acquisition of farmland could be. And that's why the clear set of rules must be formulated. And 31 nations have agreed last September and to meet in New York to work on the set of rules to govern the international transactions of farmland. And the regulations are expected to incorporate the rights of local residents. But even if rules are set, there is no legal framework to enforce compliance. And some have already questioned whether international regulations can make a difference.
Well, I guess once again we get back to that question, securing stable grain prices and reliable food supply. It's going to be a serious challenge, not for all these developing countries like Africa, but for industrialized nations as well. Thank you very much for coming in. Kohei Tsuji of NHK World.